Most important rule of exercise is all exercise is better than none. We always have to remember, let's get consistent first before we worry about the perfect program. Really keeping in the back of your mind, like, I need to be challenging myself is one of the best guides that we can have for kind of that. I think sometimes we worry too much about, do I have the right exact movement? Is it 3 sets by 8 reps, or is it 5 by 5 or something like that? When instead we just want to think about, okay, I'm going for a set of 10. The set of 10 needs to be challenging. I need to get to 9 and wonder if I'm going to get 10 versus, is the set of 10 the perfect number?
Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I am here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that'll help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. How are you, EC?
Good. How are you?
Wondrous. Great. Good to see you. This week, we are going to continue our slightly new format here. So we've got 2 parts to this episode. Our main conversation is going to be all about sarcopenia, which is the natural loss of muscle mass as we age. We're going to talk about what it is, why it happens, and what we can do to fight back against it. And then we will wrap up this episode with a listener question about the value of doing a long, repetitive CrossFit workout, specifically one called CHAD, which is basically a workout where you do step-ups until you want to chop your legs off so you don't have to do any more step-ups. That's what that workout is. So that's what we're going to wrap up this episode with. But first, sarcopenia. What the heck are we talking about? Give us a little bit of background to what it is, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, so I just want to give a quick shout out before kind of some of the background of sarcopenia is that we had a listener, Mark, write in. Thank you to Mark. He not only suggested that this be a topic, he gave me the full outline for the episode. So thanks, Mark. That was great. I was just like, oh, this is awesome. I just have to fill in the gaps here. So I'm open to ideas when people also want to write my episode outline because it helps.
Yeah, if they would like to produce an episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that any day of the week. So thank you, Mark. Yeah. I'm going to see how much I'm going to squeeze in. There were a couple topics I'm not going to be able to get here, but they're still on the list. But anyway, kind of just the background of sarcopenia, you already kind of hinted at what it is, but yes, it is the natural loss of muscle mass as we age. To be clinically diagnosed with it, there's this combination of functional tests like grip strength or walking speed in combination with how much muscle mass you have. And then so somebody who has sarcopenia would have significantly less muscle mass than a younger group of adults, which is typically less than 40 years old. And when I say significantly less, for my statisticians, this is 2 standard deviations below what that group would have. And so it's this combination of, hey, you don't have the functional requirements, but then also your muscle mass is quite low. And we do start losing muscle mass after 30 years old, and we're going to talk a little bit about the rates of that. But if you just the point is, if you lose a little bit of muscle, it's not like, okay, now you're diagnosed with sarcopenia. It has to be the significant loss of muscle mass. The prevalence of sarcopenia in the 60 to 70-year-old bracket is about 5 to 13%. And then that, of course, increases in people over 80 years old. We're talking about 11 to 50%, quite a wide range there of people who have sarcopenia. Now, the real problem with this loss of muscle mass, I mean, I know we have an active audience, so, maybe our mind first goes to, well, shoot, I'm not going to be able to work out as intensely, or maybe that's going to be related to my weight gain. That is true, but part of the problem with sarcopenia is that very much the angle of the high quality of life, or it decreases the high quality of life, because when we have this loss of muscle mass, we also have an increased likelihood of things like falls and fractures and disability, and it even increases your risk of death. Now, here's the other thing that I think we really always have to remember, and it actually came up quite recently in the body recomposition episode, and that's the difference between muscle mass and strength. And that, yes, generally when we're talking about strength, generally we have more muscle mass, but that strength component has a neurological aspect to it. And I bring that up because when we're looking at sarcopenia, we find that low muscle strength is a more reliable measure of muscle function and a better predictor of potentially these adverse outcomes than just how much muscle mass you have. Meaning maybe you've lost 5 pounds of muscle over X number of years, but if you can still squat 95 pounds, that maintained squat strength is telling us that you haven't changed your health risk. And that really shouldn't come as a surprise when you kind of play that out, because when we're thinking about preventing falls and preventing disability, we want to think about, are we able to kind of keep up with life and do life's daily tasks? It's not just about like, oh, I need more muscle mass on my frame. Is that muscle mass functional, which I think also we highlighted quite recently kind of in the Blue Zones episode of longevity. It's like these people are so active, and that's part of the whole thing about them living a long, high quality life.
Quick clarifying question before we move on. You talked about like 5 to 13%, and then you talked about when a little bit older, 11. Is that the number of people who can be diagnosed with sarcopenia, or is that like that's the degree to which sarcopenia has kicked in, has affected you? In other words, is everybody getting sarcopenia, or is it some people do, and obviously as you get older, that percentage of some people get larger and larger?
Yeah, that's the percentage of people who have it in those age brackets. And I think some of the reasons why it's not just a single percent is, as far as I understand, there are some different standards for diagnosing it. So I think it's based on how you diagnose it. There could be a different number of people who qualify for it. And then also, I think there's going to be a different frequency of people have it based on their age, right? So if I said that there's 11 to 50% of people who are over the 80-year-old bracket who have it, closer to 80 years old is going to have the lower percentage likelihood. And as you continue to get older and older, your percentage increases.
Got it. Okay. Super helpful. So can you explain what kind of loss of muscle and strength somebody with sarcopenia can expect over time?
Yeah. And I liked this overall stat about muscle mass loss. Between the ages of 20 to 80, we should expect a 30% reduction in muscle mass. Now, that percent of muscle mass that we're losing really starts around 30. And then we do tend to sort of see an increased rate of muscle mass loss, especially over 60, 65. So the rate of muscle mass loss is about 0.3 to 0.8% every year after 30. And then 65 plus, that creeps up to, let's say, 1% loss of your muscle mass. And again, we've got that range in there because it's going to be somewhat dependent on how active you are, genetics, all of that stuff. So a little bit of a range there. Now, to distinguish that muscle mass loss with strength loss, muscle mass strength looks to decline 1.5 to 5% per year after age 50. That's the stat that I could find. I couldn't find one for 30 years old. But again, that range is there because of activity variation and intensity variation and genetics. And we're going to be closer to that 5% range after the older ages. So again, it accelerates after 65. Now, why is this happening? You know, a lot of the factors are going to be related to your change in diet and exercise, and just a decreased level of activity or a decreased amount of intensity. And I know that is often not received favorably. There's people that will be like, no, I'm just as active. I work out every day. And I think, yes, you can still be quite active, but I think for many people, you're going to be hard pressed to really be able to say that you're going with the same gusto, the same intensity, the same level of steps per day as you were when you were 20 or 30. And it's just because of those shifting life priorities, right? In different seasons of our life and things that we have to focus on. And I also think that in kind of our 40 plus age range, there's those orthopedic injuries that have cropped up as well. You know, the knee accident from skiing or whatever it is. And so now that's another limitation of why we can't maybe lift as heavy or go as hard. It's not just that you've cut back on the activities, but when we have the list of activities that we can do, that can also decrease. Now, there's a really interesting study, I guess it's Wobolewski. Geez, I don't know on these pronunciations, but it's in the show notes. And I loved it because they were looking at a really wide age range. They looked at people aged 40 to 81. And this was a bunch of masters athletes. And now it's just a bunch is a relatively small study here. It's only about 40 individuals. But they were looking at these relatively high level recreational athletes who trained 4 to 5 times a week. Again, age ranges 40 to 81. They did not find that there was a decrease in muscle mass with age. So kind of counter to what I just said. And then they also did a measure of strength. They did like an isometric force test, so sort of think like a wall sit or something like that. And they found that that measure of strength was not affected by age. And so one of their conclusions was that this study kind of contradicts the observation that muscle mass and strength decline with age. And instead, they say that it's really this chronic disuse rather than muscle aging that's the problem. And so it really speaks again to this use it or lose it phenomenon. We just talked about that with the blue zones. But again, if you don't continue to stress your muscles in the way that you need them, there's no reason for the body to keep that muscle mass around. Remember, the body responds to the stresses that we put on it. So if we want to keep having that same level of strength, which requires a certain amount of muscle mass, we need to keep stressing the body in the way for it to need that.
Super interesting. Okay, but there must be, I'm just listening to the imaginary criticism to what you just said, which is like, yeah, but getting older, this happens. This is supposed to happen. Like everybody I know who gets older gets weaker, gets less active, et cetera. So is there something specifically about aging that is affecting sarcopenia, like just like the literal act of aging that is contributing to sarcopenia?
Yeah, it definitely appears to be. Lifestyle, diet changes are affecting it, but then also aging directly seems to affect it. And there is this pretty epic paper by Larson in the show notes, and he goes through a lot of different mechanisms. I'm going to try to do a very high level overview of a couple of them. But one of the points that he makes is that we see world records, let's say in track and field, really decline after 30 years old. And yet we know people who maybe are in their heyday at 28 or 29, it's not like they get to 30 and they just stop training hard. They're still going out there, especially at the high level. They're still trying, and yet the world records aren't set there. So there has to be something that is truly just related to aging. And this is different from that last study I mentioned. Like they did do a kind of a wall sit test to measure strength, but that's not really the same as, let's say, going for an 800-meter sprint in terms of performance. We know that, the 40-year-olds are not setting the world record on the 800-meter sprint, right? We know that the 80-year-olds are going slower than the 40-year-olds. So something truly must be going on with that aging process. Okay, so a little review kind of about muscles is muscle tissue is composed of muscle cells, also called muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers are bundled into what's called a motor unit, where all of the fibers are innervated, or we can use that word activated, by a neuron, so a cell in your nervous system. And some motor units have thousands of muscle fibers, like those would be in the thigh. And then you also have muscle fibers in your eyes, which would have much fewer number of muscle fibers because we need to squat a lot more weight than we need with the force to like blink our eye open and close. But how many motor units you have and in what order they sort of contract are dictated by the nervous system. And your nervous system gets better and better at understanding, okay, how many different muscle fibers do I need to contract and in what order with training? Now, I'm also pretty sure people have heard about different muscle fiber types. We're going to stay really broad here. We're going to talk about two of them. There's type 1, which are known as the slow twitch, and there's type 2, which are known as the fast twitch. And the slow twitch are ones that are more like the oxidative, aerobic, long duration stuff. And then the fast twitch are more the anaerobic, sprinting, lifting heavy type stuff. And your muscles do have a mix of both. And how much you have and how many, genetics come into play, but of course your training do as well. Okay, so why did I go through all of that? It's a lot of background there. The precipitating event in aging may be the loss of motor neurons, the nerve cells that activate those muscle fibers. So if you don't have the nerve cells to recruit the muscle fibers, then we're just not going to be recruiting as many. And so therefore, we're not going to be able to generate the same amount of power or force. And within the loss of the neurons, it looks to be that there is this preferential deinnervation or preferential loss of activating type 2 fibers. Those are the ones that are the more power-centric fibers, right? And so this is where it seems to be especially that it makes sense why our world records, especially for kind of strength and power and stuff like that, drop off earlier and why they're affected by age. Another mechanism that we find is that we see with age, fat tends to accumulate in the muscle. And some of this is probably, again, decreased activity and changes in nutrition, but this accumulation of the fat in the muscle seems to limit our strength. And so we have this sort of changing what you could call type of muscle fibers. We get less type 2 and also different composition, more fat in the muscle, such that this is likely affecting our power generation and performance. And the last one I want to touch on, we've also mentioned this a few times, but in the process of creating energy, so not just about muscle contraction, we also need to create energy to allow those muscles to contract. In the process of creating energy, we generate these molecules that are highly reactive called free radicals, and they can damage other tissues and cells. And so there is the potential that just this accumulated damage over time is affecting the cells that literally create energy. So in the process of creating energy, we can be damaging the cells that are creating energy. And so we just might have a diminished capacity. Maybe we have enough muscle cells and fibers around, but maybe we don't have the same level of capacity to generate the energy to contract or to make those muscle fibers contract. So a lot of different things could potentially be going on. That is just aging specific.
Got it. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about if there are any strategies to counter or mitigate or maybe even reverse sarcopenia. Like, is it still, like, I guess, like, is it possible to continue to add muscle or put on muscle after 30, 40, 50 when this is likely to be happening at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely sarcopenia can be reversed. And the good news is diet and exercise, which we've talked about once or twice before, is going to be what we need to do that. And I'm going to give a couple more specifics on that soon. But I do like that question of like, can I put on muscle mass as I age? And yes, you can, which of course kind of sounds at odds with the statistics I just rattled off before. It was like after age 30, 0.8%, right, decline every year. So how do you kind of reconcile those thoughts? I think it's useful to think about there is some maximum upper limit relative to your genetics that you could have on your frame in terms of muscle mass. And that natural upper limit declines every year after 30. So you could never have the muscle mass at age 50 that you could have had at age 30. But if you weren't doing much in your 30s, and let's say you found CrossFit in your 50s, you'll definitely put on muscle. And you might end up even having more muscle at 50 than you did at 30, just because at 30 you had so little relative to your baseline, right? But then there's this kind of huge middle ground gray area, right? Where there's this maybe maximum upper genetic limit and then kind of a minimal amount of muscle mass. And then probably where the bulk of our audience is somewhere in the middle. So the question always then is, okay, well, how much muscle mass can I gain, or how much muscle mass will I lose? Shoulder shrug. That's going to depend on how much muscle mass you have to start, how close you were to your genetic limit, depend on your genetics, of course, will depend on the type of training you do, how intense you are. And I think a lot of people simply can't push to what might be genetically possible for them at age 50 due to the factors we already discussed, right? Changing job, family, career, just different seasons of life. And so I think instead of worrying about, okay, I'm going to lose 1% of my muscle mass per year and kind of trying to figure that out, the best answer is just to try to continue to challenge yourself in your movements and your activities. And that will either allow you to maximally grow your muscle and or buffer the loss of muscle mass as much as possible.
Okay, diet and exercise, got it. Any specifics? Any specifics that you would recommend that maybe aren't the broader, more general advice that we do often give here? Anything specifically to sarcopenia that might be particularly useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is my recommendations don't change with age, and I think people are expecting that they will. I think people find personally for them at the individual level, their diet and exercise has to change, but that's because they have to accommodate how their diet and lifestyle has been changing over the years, right? They're getting less active, or they realize that they just kind of can't get away with the same number of calories that they did previously. And so, yeah, they have to change their diet as they're aging, but that doesn't mean my baseline recommendations are changing. And so in terms of exercise, it's kind of the same of what I said before, but I do always like to re-highlight the first and most important rule of exercise is all exercise is better than none. We always have to remember, let's get consistent first before we worry about the perfect program. And then once you are consistently exercising, it's that 1 to 2 times per week. That's more the resistance training sessions. And then the 3 to 4 times a week, that's a little bit more the cardio. Where when I say cardio, that would be a mix of kind of the short, intense stuff, maybe CrossFit-esque, and then also a mix of some of that lower intensity, longer duration, swim, bike stuff. Now, resistance training, people often kind of want to know more specifics on what that means. And generally, we're talking about adding some type of external resistance to the body, like a dumbbells or a barbell type workout, and where you keep trying to progress or increase the weight over time. Again, really keeping in the back of your mind, like I need to be challenging myself is one of the best guides that we can have for kind of that. I think sometimes we worry too much about, do I have the right exact movement? Is it 3 sets by 8 reps, or is it 5 by 5 or something like that? When instead we just want to think about, okay, I'm going for a set of 10. The set of 10 needs to be challenging, right? I need to get to 9 and wonder if I'm going to get 10 versus, is the set of 10 the perfect number? And a great example of that is I said that, resistance training is often with dumbbells or barbells, but maybe for people that are working on push-ups, a bodyweight push-up or a series of 5 to 10 bodyweight push-ups for them would be resistance training. And then once that becomes easy and normal, maybe they will have to add weight to maybe their back, or maybe they will have to do a bench press to continue to kind of progress, right? So I don't like people to get too dogmatic about what resistance training is. And instead it's, I have to kind of challenge myself in these low rep ranges with increasing loads. And then, a mix of kind of stuff for that cardio stuff. I think we've kind of touched on that before. There's no magic there. It's all good. Mix it up, stay interested, and challenge yourself, whether or not it's 5 minutes long or whether or not it's 30 minutes long. As for nutrition, we're going to still say that 800 gram challenge. And I'm still going to say that 0.7 grams per pound of body weight of protein. The research that I've seen for sarcopenia, they find that an intake of about 0.55 grams per pound can be enough to prevent that muscle mass loss. I think it's very easy in our kind of functional fitness community, because so many people are recommending 1 gram per pound, to think that 0.7 is so low. And it's like, oh gosh, well now if I'm, losing muscle mass with age, I definitely need to go up to 1 gram. But 0.7 is already relatively high relative to the RDA, and definitely high once we go to the literature. And so again, where we find what can be protective of sarcopenia is actually lower than the 0.7. And so in a resistance training culture or resistance training population, I think the 0.7 is still a great place to be. And the final thing I'll say about nutrition is, we did have that whole podcast on creatine, which is one of the 2 supplements that I say is kind of worth a shot. And that can be worth a shot for this population as well. It doesn't change with age. It's just the same recommendations there. But we want to make sure that we have consistent exercise and consistent fruits and vegetables and consistent protein before just thinking, okay, I'm going to just add my creatine every day and I'm going to have all these muscles that I don't know what to do with.
You started that little fitness and nutrition bit there by saying, like, my recommendations don't actually change with age. But I'm curious, what do some people say they should be doing once somebody ages? In other words, like you're saying, like, no, nothing changes, which I assume means there are people out there saying like, okay, once you get to 40, 45, 50, 60, you should do this with your fitness and your exercise, and you should do this with your nutrition, just so that I have a sense of like what you're countering against. Like, what, if you had to broadly say, like, what are people making the argument for that you're saying, no, what works for 30 works for 50 and works for 60?
Yeah, I think it's, because we have this loss of muscle mass as we age, that you should be eating 1 gram per pound once you're over, let's say, 50 years old, and the 0.7 isn't enough. Or once you're over 50, you really need to be doing resistance training 2 times a week or something like that. And again, I think it's not so much that there needs to be a change or an increase. It's that so many times our younger years have been lived without hitting those standards. So when people get to those age ranges, they find that, they do have to change to kind of play catch up. And then in some cases, I think that some of the recommendations just are a little bit more excessive than we truly need. Is it harmful per se? No, but we also don't need to necessarily have people resistance training 4 times a week because they're over 50. We're eating 1 gram per pound of body weight to stay above sarcopenia.
Got it. Okay, cool. Any final thoughts on this subject of sarcopenia that you want to make sure we hit before we move on?
Yeah, I think sometimes when we talk about aging, maybe it's just my bias, but sometimes I feel like there's kind of these like doom and gloom episodes of like, we're just losing muscle mass and we're gaining weight and it's just this downward spiral. And, it's, again, like, I don't like to point out the blue zones as this example of optimal, but I do love them, again, as a sort of just reality check. Let me tell you what those cultures were not doing to reach over 100 years old. They were not going to the gym with some perfect weightlifting protocol of progressive, overload. They were not, writing down their protein grams to hit, 0.7 grams per day. They were not taking creatine. Those are not the strategies. Now, again, that doesn't mean that what I just said about diet and exercise and the 0.7 grams and doing resistance training is bad, But I really just think what all of this continues to highlight for us in light of the blue zones is that use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. We don't necessarily need this most perfect weightlifting protocol. We don't necessarily need these exact wonderful foods in our diet, but we need to just have some really basic habits in place, and especially around sarcopenia, one that's related to function. Let me tell you the best way to lose the ability to get off the floor. Stop sitting on the floor. Let me tell you the best way to lose your coordination. Stop trying new sports. Stop running. Try to slow down. All of that stuff is basically creeping in and is making your whole case a little bit harder. And it's so easy to kind of, I don't say so easy, but it's so simple the way that we can kind of move forward to have this high quality of life. And I just think it's our modern food environment and our modern lifestyles that really are what make it hard for us to do. Yet simple practices will allow us to stave this off, and we don't have to get so into the weeds again about, protein consumption or supplement regime.
Love that. All right. Thank you. We are going to do a listener question about specifically about a workout called Chad in just a minute. But first, I want to make sure folks know about really like the main thing for UEC, which is the 3 Pillars Method Masterclass. If you all out there are ready to finally ditch the diet confusion, perhaps then it is time you jump into the next round of the 3 Pillars Method Masterclass. What is it? I know you've heard us talk about it, but it's a 10-week nutrition masterclass that EC has been perfecting for years, designed to help you cut through the nutritional noise and get right to the heart of what it takes to eat well sustainably. The next masterclass doesn't start till January, but now is the time to get on the waiting list so you can ensure that you get in. As a listener to this here podcast, you understand the principles. We talk about them all the time. But the masterclass is a perfect way to turn principles into practice, and you get to do it all under EC's guidance. If you want to learn more and get on that waiting list, head to optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass, or even easier, click the link in the show notes and get on that list. I promise you, you will not regret it. All right, my friend. We're going to do a quick bite. Quick bite. Usually in the past, in the ancient history of the show, we did whole episodes with quick bites, but we're going to bring them into the close of the occasional episode here. So quick bite is just when we take a listener question and you sort of break it down in about 10 minutes tops. This question we've got this week is from Patricia. She says, I'm a 53-year-old female in great shape and have done CrossFit for more than 6 years. Our gym owner recently announced that we would be doing the Chad Hero workout for Veterans Day. I just wondered if 1,000 step-ups to a 20-inch box, that's the workout, even without the weighted vest, is such a great idea. I worry that it is a damaging amount of repetitions with no real benefit. Am I just being a whiny baby?
I don't think you're being a whiny baby, but I also don't think it's that damaging.
Okay, we're done.
We're done. That's a wrap. Thank you for the question. No, it's interesting. I mean, I've definitely done Chad, and I will say if you decide to do 1,000 step-ups and you haven't been kind of working up in volume, you will have very sore calves for a number of days. Like, oh my God, what did I do? I had no idea how sore my calves could be specifically. She did say she's quite active. So of course, if people are new to this type of training and stuff, we need to obviously scale up and all that stuff. But I just think I like to kind of reframe the question. Would you have that same concern if I said Monday to Friday this week, we're all going to take a mile walk to the top of some, not mountain, but you know what I mean? Just some sort of nature hike or something that has some sort of vertical climb. And I think the response would be, oh no, okay, we're just going out doing a short hike to start class or something like that. And so that's where I would sort of be like, that's really not that much different from this. Now, if you were going to change again the question and say, I plan to do Chad every day for the next 3 months, I might say, okay, unless we're training for Mount Everest, I'm not entirely sure that we need to kind of start going down that rabbit hole, and then we're going to start getting into overtraining injuries and all of that stuff and joint overuse. But just the dose is just not that much. Again, for somebody who's active, I want to caveat all this stuff. I don't need all these people just jumping into Chad and never done a step up and stuff like that. But from the standpoint of like 1,000 step ups, it's just not that much. It's not that much, in my opinion, especially once. It's such a low dose relative to how resilient the human body is. Yeah.
One of the things we just talked about with the sarcopenia, the sort of the theme that you kept coming back to is that it's important for us to continue to challenge ourselves physically. And that is in fact not the secret, but the secret of, staving off or fighting against something like sarcopenia. And I think that there's probably lots of things that the regular doses of physical challenge will preserve us against. And so I bring that up only to ask, is that the real value or a real value of doing a workout like chat? It's a hero workout. So for folks who maybe aren't well inside of the CrossFit community, hero workouts are meant to be a lot. That's their very purpose is to do two things. One is to challenge yourself physically in a way that you don't do regularly. And through that, to remember usually a fallen soldier, and do this workout in memory of them and in memory of their sacrifice. So all of that to say, is that the real value of chat? Is just you're not going to do it that often. You're not doing it every week, to your point. You're not certainly doing it probably every month. It's maybe once a year you do this particular workout. And the value is not in the quote unquote fitness you get from it, but from the mental and physical challenge of saying, that's really daunting. I think I can do it. And let's actually see.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's so much of why just CrossFit generally is powerful for people, even besides just the hero workouts. It's, wow, I didn't think I could do that. And presenting new challenges many days for people to learn and to kind of grow that way. And so, yeah, I think so 100%. There's a fine line, of course, right? Again, for somebody who's never kind of been doing step ups, or even people who maybe have been going to CrossFit but haven't done any type of step ups in months, I don't know that I'd start at 1,000. So there's always kind of that line of dose, even in something like exercise. Doesn't just become a nutrition term that we talk about all the time, to kind of think about what's the appropriate dose. And maybe 1,000 steps isn't for you. Maybe if you're an active CrossFitter, maybe 500 is the appropriate dose to start with. And I know they do a great job of scaling that workout as the national organization. But the point is that, yes, there is this really nice place where you can find a place to challenge yourself. And it has, for a lot of people, kind of come through these types of CrossFit workouts, because they tend to be a little bit more than kind of a daily workout. And people are surprised and then realized, oh, wow, I have even more room to keep challenging myself. Yeah.
Last question. And I know you are not currently and actively a coach inside of a CrossFit gym, but you did spend a lot of time coaching folks in gyms and at seminars, et cetera. If Patricia was actually in front of you and today's workout was today's Chad, and she raised this, she's in the gym, she's ready to work out, but maybe she has this particular concern, is this excessive? Are we about to do something silly? I'm just curious, what would you tell her other than what we've already talked through? If she was literally in front of you and she was raising this concern, what would your prescription that day, knowing that she's in the next hour, she's going to go do this thing? Would it be cool, let's just do 500? Would it be something else? Would you address this, again, if Patricia was in front of you in a different way?
I don't know, a different way. I would definitely have different scaling options. I think some of the best scaling options, and something like this also too, are just a time cap that isn't set on the 500 steps, but it might be, let's see where you are at 30 minutes or something like that. Versus we're definitely going to do 500, because obviously someone's fitness starts to limit their speed, and therefore we just kind of cap them at a time versus a number of steps, which maybe they go beyond what would be appropriate. So it would also come down to some of the programming. I know step ups aren't programmed quite as frequently. And so if we really haven't done them, then yeah, I would probably err more side on the caution. I know some gyms, they probably start doing some step ups in the week prior and start building a little bit of volume, such that then they feel ready that their more members are going to tackle it. So there's a few other considerations I would have. And also, let the individual choose. If they're feeling 1,000 sounds completely insane, I don't want to do that. Okay, what volume sounds more? Let it be a kind of a shared decision. It doesn't always have to be the coach. It's no, I said 500, when was the last time you did step ups? How many step ups? It's I haven't done them ever. It's okay, we're not doing 1,000.
Yeah, I love that. Those are some great strategies. All right, cool. Thank you. Hopefully that helps, Patricia. Thanks everybody out there for listening. Thank you for your ratings and your reviews. If you have not yet rated and or reviewed the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this, it does help new folks trust that the show is worthy of their time. So thank you in advance. If you have not yet done so, thank you for doing it. EC and I will be back for another episode of The Consistency Project next week.